Since the start of this new year and the arrest and capture of ex-President Nicolas Maduro, you've been hearing Western Hemisphere a lot from the White House. You might even have seen this recently from the State Department. Now, the language comes from a more than 200-year-old historical document, the Monroe Doctrine, which Trump is using to justify his plans for expansion.
Monroe Doctrine, we sort of forgot about it. It was very important, but we forgot about it. We don't forget about it anymore. Under our new national security strategy, American dominance in the Western Hemisphere will never be questioned again. Won't happen.
Well, they remembered the principle has played a key role in American foreign policy for the last 2 centuries. Trump has taken it one step further by coining the term Donroe Doctrine, after Donald, and is reasserting America's claim to the Western Hemisphere. So a closer look now at what this all means for countries within that hemisphere, ours included. We're joined by Mariano Aguirre Ernst, Associate Fellow at Chatham House and researcher at the Barcelona Center for International Affairs. Great to have you with us this morning.
Thank you for having me. Good morning.
First of all, why was the Monroe Doctrine created, and how is Trump twisting its intention from a defensive stance to a justification for acquisition?
Well, the Monroe Doctrine is a document, as you mentioned. It's a declaration of 200 years ago in which the United States, the U.S. government at that time, stated that will oppose any kind of European interference. And for European interference, we need to remember that was the time of the revolutions, anti-imperial revolutions against Portugal, against Spain, against France, for example, against Britain. And what the US wanted at that time was not to have any kind of interference, declaring that any interference from the Europeans would be seen as an attack as an aggression to the United States. Now, we need to remember it was very much symbolic, because the United States was not yet an empire, was a state with a territorial expansion, westbound, southbound. So, as a matter of fact, the imperial powers continue their activities, but that was the beginning of a 200 years hegemony in the region.
Since ousting Venezuela's now ex-President Maduro, the Trump administration has already now made threats, as we know, against Colombia, Cuba, and Greenland. The Monroe Doctrine is a foreign policy stance. It's not a law. So does it, no pun intended, but does it trump international rules? Trump knows that it's a policy stance. It's not, a law. So what is the strategy of touting it now?
Well, as a matter of fact, we need to understand this revival of the Monroe Doctrine as a part is very much understandable in the context of the national security strategy that has been launched on last November by the White House. In the national security strategy, you have 5 pages dedicated mainly to Latin America, but it's more than Latin America. It's this concept of the hemisphere that you mentioned before. And the hemisphere from Washington now is from Greenland to Patagonia. And what they wanted is very, very clear. What they wanted is to have dominance. It's not only hegemony, it's dominance over access to natural resources, energy, minerals, is access to sea lanes, is free and absolute access also to any kind of resources that they will need, is to establish very good relationships, they said, with governments alike, let's say Javier Milei in Argentina, Bukele in El Salvador, and that they will punish, as they just punished Venezuela, other governments that are not friendly. And they, allow me to say very briefly, they were very explicit, what they want from all the governments, friends or not friends, what they want is to cooperate in 2 fields. One is to stop migrants moving to the United States, and also accepting deportees from the United States. And second is cooperate in the so-called war on drugs that the United States has been, fighting for the last almost 40 years.
Yeah. 2 things to observe. One, in this first Trump administration back in 2016, we learned that President Trump does something really well, which is seed messaging. So by touting the Monroe Doctrine and interpreting it as America's right to the rule of the Western Hemisphere as opposed to the right to defend themselves is one thing to take note of. But it also becomes interesting when you now put this conversation of Greenland into context, and you see NATO leaders meeting and Trump saying, I'd like to take over Greenland, and NATO leaders are cautious in their approach. Why do you think the language has been so tame coming from European leaders, as opposed to saying, you can't do this?
Well, I must say that the problem with the European leaders is that they are trying to appease President Trump, and they work on the basis of I would say, a delusional idea that in 3 years it's just we need to wait, and then in 3 years MAGA movement and Trump will be over and we will return to business as usual. And I think it's really a wrong approach, because as a matter of fact, as MAGA, and even if Donald Trump disappeared tomorrow, the MAGA movement, all the far-right movement in the United States, is extremely strong, with a strong basis from social roots to ideological basis and political basis as well. So Europe is having a very tenuous, as you said, shy approach, just waiting and adopting a very cautious approach instead of consolidating itself. I mean, it's true that there is a movement in this direction, but at the same time, still there are a tendency, a trend, an inertia of being dependent and waiting for the United States to change. And I think it's completely wrong.
It's been interesting watching this tension between diplomacy and audacity. Great to have you with us this morning, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much.